Today's question's from Jason, and it's about how do you manage junior developers when they're using AI tools to build systems that are possibly more sophisticated than their level of skill or their understanding? This is a problem that I'd say affects anyone building with AI, regardless of your level of skill. I think one of the challenges, though, especially with junior developers, is that gap between what you've built and how well do you understand it, and just your level of experience and skill of conventions and best practices. That gap can get really wide really quickly unless you're careful. And so the solution isn't necessarily any particular tactic or more oversight. It's around using constraints to force understanding and conventions. So I'll give three examples that came to mind when I was thinking about this. The first one is using spec-driven development, which is not a new concept. Spec-driven development means writing down what your system should do in plain language before anyone writes code. It's where you describe the behavior, the edge cases, how to test it, and then AI generates both the code and the tests from that spec. The second piece is using opinionated frameworks in type safety. So for example, using a framework like Next.js as opposed to just creating a React app. Now there will be opinions around what are good frameworks and when do you follow the framework or when are they overboard. But in general, I think especially when working with AI, using something like Next.js or even going as far as using the T3 stack, using these frameworks that have strong conventions is really important because it helps you establish patterns around how you build stuff. And this matters even more with AI because AI can generate working code in any architecture where it becomes a huge mess and very difficult, especially for anyone to actually maintain, understand, or test, is when it starts inventing or inconsistently following conventions. So the frameworks are used as guardrails to both guide and provide rules to the LLM, which enables you to document best practices. And then you can use AI again to understand, does it deviate from those best practices, and also identify code smells and stuff like that based off of our guidelines. And this is extremely important, especially as you start having multiple people work on a system. And I would say even for a small MVP, the more experience you get using and following an opinionated framework, the easier it is also to identify as a programmer when is an AI essentially creating things that don't seem quite right. So don't let AI invent architecture. Channel it through a framework and the rules and best practices related to that framework. The third is, and this is especially true of junior developers, is learning how to do defensive driving around testing and validating that a system works in the way that you expect, and not just that it's creating tests, but do the tests actually test what you think they're testing? Making sure that certainly early on that a developer who's building based off specs, that they also go in and they understand what has been built and why, and to ask questions. And there's a lot of strategies around using multiple LLMs to analyze the same code base or the same problem. And so the skill of a lot of up and coming developers, but also established developers, but certainly true for more junior developers, is getting really comfortable and good at learning how to use AI to test AI. So these three practices are not separate tactics per se. They are three different ways to create constraints around a forced understanding and how you're building a system. And specs force you to understand what you're building. The frameworks force the AI to follow known patterns and help you as a human identify when is the AI deviating from any of these norms, as well as it makes it easier to have a shared understanding convention when you're collaborating with multiple people. So if you take anything from this, it's write specs first, use opinionated frameworks like Next.js or T3, and then make sure that developers understand their code.